You have to ask yourself why the ground is suddenly shifting beneath our feet, and why the tectonic plates of power in Washington, D.C. are grinding against each other with such violent intensity right now. We are looking at a situation that defies the standard laws of political gravity, a moment where the curtain has been pulled back just enough to reveal the gears of a machine that is usually hidden in the deepest shadows. When you hear that the Department of Justice is issuing subpoenas regarding the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, your first instinct shouldn't be to nod along with the nightly news anchors who read teleprompters written by corporate interests. Your first instinct needs to be a sharp, piercing suspicion, because things like this do not happen by accident in the swamp, and they certainly don't happen without a very specific, calculated agenda behind them. We need to stop and really digest the gravity of what Senator John Kennedy is talking about here, because on the surface, it looks like a simple legal procedure, just another day in the bureaucratic meat grinder. But if you scratch the surface, if you peel back that thin veneer of official business, you start to smell something burning. Something that smells a lot like a controlled demolition of the financial order we have grown accustomed to. Kennedy is out there defending Powell, talking about integrity and the lack of evidence, but let's be real for a second and look at the timing of this entire charade. Why now? Why, at a moment when the global economy is balancing on the edge of a razor blade, does the executive branch decide to launch a torpedo at the captain of the ship? It is absolutely fascinating to watch Senator Kennedy, a man who knows where the bodies are buried, step up to the microphone and issue what sounds like a defense but feels more like a warning shot to the aggressors. He talks about the fragility of the economy, warning that a public conflict between the DOJ and the Fed could send interest rates skyrocketing and crush the average American family. That is not just a casual observation from a concerned lawmaker, that is code, a signal flare being shot up into the dark sky to tell the people pulling the strings that they are playing with a nuclear option. When you threaten the stability of the Federal Reserve, you are not just attacking a man, you are attacking the money printer itself, the very lifeblood of the empire, and you have to wonder who benefits from that chaos. Let's talk about this concept of perjury that seems to be floating around in the whisper networks. Kennedy points out, quite rightly, that accusations are not proof, and that throwing around the P-word is a dangerous game. But anyone who has watched Washington for more than 10 minutes knows that perjury traps are the favorite tool of the deep state when they want to remove someone who has become inconvenient. They don't need to prove you committed a crime, they just need to get you under oath, ask you 1,000 questions about what you had for breakfast 3 years ago, and find one discrepancy to hang you with. Is that what is happening to Powell? Has the chairman of the Federal Reserve, the man who controls the lever of inflation, suddenly stopped playing ball with the powers that be? Think about the implications of a power struggle between the Department of Justice and the Federal Reserve, because this is not a conflict we see in the history books very often. The Fed is supposed to be independent, a sacred cow that stands apart from the dirty mud wrestling of partisan politics. But here we have the DOJ, the enforcement arm of the current administration, effectively pointing a gun at the head of the central bank. You have to ask yourself if this is a hostile takeover. Is there a faction within the shadows that wants Powell out of the way so they can install a puppet? Someone who will print money on command without asking questions about inflation or long-term consequences? Senator Kennedy's warning about the cost of living is the part that should send a chill down your spine, because he is acknowledging the pain that is already being felt on Main Street. But there is a subtext there, a suggestion that things can get much, much worse if this internal war continues. It makes you wonder if the economic pain we are feeling is a side effect of incompetence, or if it is a manufactured crisis designed to force a transition to a new system. Are they trying to break the current financial model so they can usher in something else, perhaps a central bank digital currency where they have total control over every cent you spend? Powell has been cautious, perhaps too cautious for the liking of the radical elements who want total transformation now. The lack of evidence that Kennedy highlights is a classic signature of a political hit job, where the accusation itself is the weapon. In the court of public opinion, you don't need a verdict, you just need a headline that says subpoena and perjury in the same sentence as the target's name. It destroys credibility, it creates a cloud of suspicion, and it weakens the target's ability to govern or lead. If they can weaken Powell, they weaken the dollar, and if they weaken the dollar, the entire house of cards starts to shake. Is that the goal? Is there a group of globalist elites who are shorting the American dream, betting against the stability of the United States because they have their lifeboats ready? We have to look at the relationship between the White House and the Fed through the lens of history, but also through the lens of modern warfare, which is fought not with tanks but with information and economic sanctions. Usually, we sanction other countries, but it looks increasingly like the factions within our own government are sanctioning each other. Kennedy is standing in the middle of the road, trying to stop traffic, waving his arms and shouting that this is suicide. He knows that if the markets lose faith in the independence of the Fed, the bond market collapses, yields spike, and the debt service on our $30-something trillion national debt becomes impossible to pay. It is a mathematical death spiral, and yet, the DOJ is pushing the button. There is a phrase we need to keep in the front of our minds, equi bono? Who benefits? If Powell is removed or disgraced, who steps into the vacuum? We need to look at the list of potential successors, the people waiting in the wings, and see who owns them. Do they belong to the same banking cartels that have been siphoning wealth from the middle class for decades, or do they represent an even more radical ideology that views private property as a problem to be solved? Kennedy's defense of Powell might not be about Powell the man, but about holding the line against a complete takeover of the financial system by political operatives who have no idea how to run an economy but know exactly how to seize power. It is also worth noting the specific language Kennedy uses when he talks about faith in Powell's integrity. In Washington, faith is a currency that is traded very carefully. By publicly vouching for Powell, Kennedy is putting his own political capital on the line, which suggests that the alternative, the successful removal of Powell, is a scenario so terrifying that even a seasoned politician like Kennedy feels the need to intervene. He is trying to act as a heat shield, absorbing the re-entry fire to protect the institution, but one man can only do so much against a coordinated institutional attack. Let's go deeper into the perjury narrative because it is the thread that threatens to unravel the whole sweater. What could they possibly be accusing him of lying about? Is it about interest rate projections? Is it about the bank failures we saw a while back? Or is it something darker, something related to the massive transfers of wealth that occurred during the last few years under the guise of emergency measures? If they are trying to pin Powell for lying, it means they have leverage, or they think they do. And when the most powerful banker in the world is being blackmailed or coerced by his own government, you know the system is fractured beyond repair. The silence from the mainstream media on the deeper implications of this is deafening, which is exactly why we have to talk about it. They will report the subpoena as a matter of fact, a dry legal update, but they won't connect the dots. They won't tell you that a destabilized Fed means your 401k evaporates. They won't tell you that this infighting is a symptom of a ruling class that has turned on itself because there are no more spoils left to divide. It is the behavior of sharks in a tank. When the food runs out, they start eating each other. Kennedy is watching the feeding frenzy and trying to remind everyone that if they break the tank, everyone dies. We also have to consider the possibility that this is all theater, a good cop, bad cop routine designed to distract us from something else. While we are all focused on the drama between the DOJ and the Fed, what is slipping through Congress unnoticed? What executive orders are being signed? What new wars are being funded? The magician waves his left hand so you don't watch his right hand. Is Kennedy part of the show, or is he the guy in the audience shouting that the emperor has no clothes? His warnings about the cost of living suggest he is genuinely worried about the backlash from the voters, because when people can't afford bread, they don't care about subpoenas, they care about survival. But let's assume for a moment that this is real, that the knives are actually out. This suggests a level of desperation in the executive branch that is unprecedented. Usually, the president and the Fed chair have a polite, if tense, relationship. They meet for breakfast, they discuss policy, they coordinate. For the DOJ to get involved means the diplomatic channels have failed. It means the velvet glove has come off and the iron fist is exposed. They are trying to criminalize monetary policy. Think about that. If you can threaten a central banker with jail time for making a decision you don't like, you have effectively ended the independence of the central bank. You have turned the printing press into a political weapon. This is the kind of stuff that happens in banana republics, not in the world's reserve currency issuer. And that is the terrifying realization that Kennedy is dancing around. He can't come out and say, we are becoming a third world dictatorship, so he says this will destabilize the economy. He uses polite Senate language to describe a catastrophic institutional collapse. He talks about rising cost of living instead of hyperinflationary depression. He is translating the horror of the situation into acceptable soundbites, but those of us with ears to hear can understand the message. The firewall is breaching. The question of evidence remains the smoking gun here. If they had a solid case, they would lead with it. They would leak the documents to their friends at the New York Times and the Washington Post. The fact that Kennedy is saying there are accusations without evidence suggests that this is a fishing expedition. They are casting a net hoping to catch a minnow that they can claim is a whale. It is lawfare, pure and simple. Using the law as a weapon of war to exhaust, bankrupt, and destroy your opponent. And if they can do it to the chairman of the Federal Reserve, imagine what they can do to you. We are watching a high-stakes poker game where the chips are your savings, your pension, and the future of your children. Kennedy is sitting at the table, trying to keep everyone calm, but the guy across from him is holding a grenade under the table. The DOJ isn't just investigating, and they are sending a message to every other institution in Washington, fall in line or prepare to be investigated. It is a consolidation of power that should terrify anyone who believes in checks and balances. The separation of powers is dissolving before our eyes, replaced by a singular, monolithic force that tolerates no dissent. And what about the markets? The markets are skittish animals. They run on confidence. Kennedy knows that if you spook the herd, the stampede will trample everything in its path. He is trying to soothe the beast, but the DOJ is firing pistols in the air. You have to wonder if the crash is the objective. There is a theory, darker than the rest, that says the only way to reset the debt is to inflate it away or default on it, and both of those options require a crisis. Are they engineering the crisis that will allow them to say, the old system failed, here is the new solution? And will that solution involve you owning nothing and being happy about it? The subpoenas are just the first shot. The real battle is for control of the narrative and control of the currency. Kennedy is a soldier in this war, perhaps one of the last few who remembers how the system was supposed to work. But he is up against a machine that has forgotten history and cares only about power. As we watch this unfold, we need to be vigilant. We need to watch not just what they say, but what they do. Watch the yields on the 10-year Treasury. Watch the price of gold. Watch the frantic movements of the insiders. Because while they are arguing about perjury and subpoenas, the foundation of the house is cracking, and we are the ones living inside it. We need to pivot now and look at the mechanic under the hood, because Senator Kennedy didn't just drop the word fragile to sound poetic. He used it because he knows the structural integrity of the entire American financial system is currently held together by duct tape, prayer, and the sheer willpower of the printing press. When he warns that a conflict between the executive branch and the Fed will destabilize the economy, he is putting it mildly. He is talking about a confidence crisis that could trigger a run on the dollar itself. And here is where the rabbit hole gets truly dark. What if that destabilization isn't an accidental side effect? What if it is a feature, not a bug? There is a school of thought, often dismissed by the talking heads on cable news, that suggests the only way to usher in a new digital financial order, the so-called central bank digital currency or CBDC, is to first burn the old system to the ground. You cannot build a new skyscraper on a lot that is already occupied. You have to demolish the existing structure first. Jerome Powell, for all his faults, is an institutionalist. He represents the old guard, the traditional banking system, the status quo of the Federal Reserve Note. Is it possible, just possible, that he is standing in the way of a more radical transformation? Is he dragging his feet on the implementation of a fully programmable currency that gives the government total surveillance over your transactions? If Powell is the roadblock to the great reset of our monetary system, then the DOJ subpoenas make perfect sense. They are the wrecking ball. They are designed to bully him into submission or force him to resign so that a true believer, a technocratic zealot, can take the helm. Imagine a Fed chair who doesn't care about market stability but cares only about implementing social engineering through monetary policy. A chair who says, "We will cut off your access to banking if you don't meet our carbon footprint standards," or "We will expire your digital dollars if you don't spend them fast enough." That is the nightmare scenario, and Kennedy, wittingly or unwittingly, is the man standing at the gate trying to keep the barbarian out. Let's look at the rising cost of living that Kennedy mentions. He frames it as a potential consequence of this infighting, but we all know it is already here. Inflation is not a weather event, it is a policy choice. It is the result of printing trillions of dollars to fund wars we didn't vote for and social programs that don't work. By attacking the Fed now, the administration might be setting up a scapegoat. If the economy completely tanks in the next 6 months, which many indicators suggest it will, they can point the finger at Powell. They can say, "It's not our spending, it's the corrupt, perjuring Federal Reserve Chair who ruined your savings." It is the perfect deflection strategy. They break the machine, and then blame the mechanic. Senator Kennedy's defense of Powell's integrity is also a fascinating piece of political theater. Kennedy is a Republican, and Powell was a Trump appointee renominated by Biden. This isn't about party lines anymore. This is about the battle between the uniparty establishment and the rogue elements within the deep state. Kennedy is signaling that there is still a faction within Congress that respects the traditional separation of powers. But how much power do they really have? The DOJ has become a leviathan, a monster that answers to no one. When they can threaten the master of the money supply, it proves that the Department of Justice has become the Department of Just Us, just them, the elite, doing whatever they want to maintain control. We also have to talk about the geopolitical timing. Look at what is happening with the BRICS nations. Russia, China, Brazil, India, they are actively working to dismantle the petrodollar, to create an alternative financial system that bypasses New York and Washington. The US dollar's hegemony is under the greatest threat it has faced since World War II. In a time like this, you need a unified front. You need the Treasury, the Fed, and the White House moving in lockstep to defend the currency. Instead, we have a civil war breaking out in DC. Why? Is it incompetence? Or is there a faction within our own government that is actually complicit in the decline of American power? Are they sabotaging the dollar from the inside to make way for a global currency managed by the IMF or some other international body? It sounds crazy until you look at the track record. They opened the borders and flooded the country with cheap labor, suppressing wages. They shut down pipelines and destroyed energy independence, driving up costs. Now, they are attacking the central bank. Every single move weakens the United States. Kennedy sees the gun pointed at the economy, and he is screaming, "Don't shoot," but the finger is already squeezing the trigger. The fragile state he refers to is not just economic, it is existential. We are watching the controlled demolition of a superpower, frame by frame, and this legal battle is just one scene in the horror movie. And let's not forget the perjury trap again. This is the oldest trick in the book. They likely asked Powell questions about things that happened behind closed doors during the banking panic, or about conversations regarding interest rate pivots. If Powell answers honestly, he might reveal things that the administration wants to keep buried, perhaps pressure from the White House to lower rates before an election to juice the numbers. If he lies to protect them, he commits perjury. If he tells the truth, he exposes the corruption. He is in a double bind. The subpoena is the vice tightening around his temples. Kennedy knows this game. He knows that perjury is often just a synonym for refusing to play along with the narrative. There is also the angle of the commercial real estate market. Everyone knows it is a ticking time bomb. Trillions of dollars in bad debt are sitting on the books of regional banks. Powell knows this. He knows that if he keeps rates high, those banks fail. If he cuts rates, inflation roars back and eats the poor alive. He is walking a tightrope over a pit of alligators. The administration might want him to cut rates now, damn the inflation, just to keep the illusion of prosperity going until the next election cycle is secured. If Powell is refusing to cut because he knows it will destroy the dollar long term, then he becomes an enemy of the immediate political agenda. The DOJ is the whip used to force the horse to gallop until its heart explodes. Senator Kennedy warns that this conflict leads to higher interest rates. Think about what that means for the national debt. We are paying over $1 trillion a year just in interest payments now. If rates go higher because of a loss of faith in the Fed, the US government becomes insolvent. We literally cannot afford to pay our bills. Is it possible that the people pushing these subpoenas simply do not understand basic math? Or do they understand it perfectly well, and they are intentionally driving the car off the cliff? Chaos creates opportunity. When a government goes bankrupt, it seizes assets. It seizes pensions. It resets the rules. This brings us back to the concept of sovereignty. Kennedy used the word citizens at the end of his statement, protecting citizens from a rising cost of living. But the modern political machine doesn't view us as citizens, it views us as tax cattle. The conflict between the DOJ and the Fed is a dispute over who gets to hold the cattle prod. Powell, for all his flaws, is at least somewhat beholden to market forces. The DOJ is beholden only to political power. If the Fed loses its independence, the last check on the government's ability to print your wealth away is gone. You will wake up one morning and a loaf of bread will cost $50, not because of supply and demand, but because a bureaucrat in the White House needed to print money to buy votes in a swing state. We have to ask, where is the oversight? Who watches the watchers? The DOJ investigates the Fed, but who investigates the DOJ? We have seen time and again that they investigate themselves and find no wrongdoing. It is a closed loop of corruption. Kennedy is speaking out in a public forum, using the Senate floor, or a committee hearing, to get this on the record, which tells me he believes the internal channels are broken. He is appealing to the court of public opinion because the courts of law have been captured. He is hoping that if enough people understand the danger, the pressure will force the DOJ to back down. But do they care about public opinion anymore? Or do they feel so secure in their power that they can openly assault the institutions of government without fear of consequence? Let's speculate on the evidence that Kennedy says is missing. In a normal world, you find evidence of a crime, then you issue a subpoena. In this new world, you issue a subpoena to find the crime. It is the Soviet model, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. They are digging through Powell's life, his emails, his trades, looking for anything. Maybe he sold a stock at the right time. Maybe he had a private dinner with a CEO. In the incestuous world of high finance, everyone is dirty if you look close enough. The fact that they are targeting him specifically, right now, tells you that he is no longer protected. His shield is down. Why? Did he refuse a direct order? Did he threaten to expose something? And consider the silence of the other governors. The Fed board has multiple members. Where are they? Why aren't they rallying around their chairman? Are they cutting deals? Are they vying for his spot? The silence suggests fear. It suggests that the message has been received, keep your head down or you are next. This is how you purge an institution. You take out the leader publicly and brutally, and the rest fall in line. Kennedy is trying to break that silence, trying to give courage to those who might be wavering. But courage is in short supply in Washington these days. The rising cost of living is the ultimate weapon of mass destruction against the middle class. It strips you of your autonomy. If you are living paycheck to paycheck, you cannot protest. You cannot organize. You are too busy trying to survive. Kennedy links the legal fight to your wallet for a reason. He wants you to understand that this isn't abstract legal theory, this is about whether you can feed your kids next year. If the Fed becomes a political arm of the White House, hyperinflation is not a risk, it is a certainty. History shows us this, from Weimar Germany to Zimbabwe to Venezuela. Every time the politicians take control of the printing press, the currency dies. Kennedy sees the ghost of Weimar hovering over the Potomac. So, as we watch this drama unfold, do not be distracted by the technical jargon. Do not get bogged down in the legal nuances of subpoenas and affidavits. Look at the power dynamic. Look at the desperation. Look at the timing. We are in the endgame of a debt supercycle, and the people in charge are fighting over the parachutes. Powell has one hand on the reserve chute, and the DOJ is trying to cut the straps. Kennedy is shouting into the wind, hoping someone listens. But as the ground rushes up to meet us, we have to wonder, is it too late? Have the decisions already been made in dark rooms by people we didn't elect? The skeptic in me says yes. The skeptic says that this is all a script being played out. But even a script can have plot twists. Kennedy's resistance is a plot twist. It suggests that not everyone has surrendered. It suggests that there is still a fight left in the old republic. But fights like this have casualties, and usually, the first casualty is the truth. We need to keep our eyes peeling, watching for the next move. Will Powell resign for health reasons? Will a scandal break? Or will the economy suddenly break in a way that necessitates emergency powers? Keep your eyes on the horizon. The storm isn't coming, the storm is here. And the captains of the ship are fighting over the wheel while the hull is breaching. Senator Kennedy just fired a flare gun. The question is, are there any lifeboats left? We have to widen the lens now. We have to stop looking at this as a squabble between two government buildings on Constitution Avenue and start seeing it as a symptom of a much deeper, more malignant pathology that has infected the entire host body of the American Republic. When Senator Kennedy talks about the danger of political infighting destabilizing the economy, he is essentially admitting that our economy is no longer based on production, innovation, or hard work. It is based on faith. It is a confidence game. And when the con artists start fighting over the loot in public, the marks, that's us, the citizens, start to realize the game is rigged. Think about the sheer insanity of the timeline we are living in. We have a national debt that is growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. We have a border that is effectively non-existent. We have a culture war tearing communities apart. And in the middle of this existential firestorm, the Department of Justice decides that the most urgent priority is to legally harass the chairman of the Federal Reserve? This is what magicians call misdirection. Look at the shiny object over here while we steal your watch over there. What is the real story they are trying to bury under these subpoenas? Is there a massive bank failure looming that they need to preemptively blame on Powell? Or is this about the impending rollout of a new financial surveillance grid that Powell is hesitant to endorse? Let's talk about the war machine connection, because in Washington, all roads eventually lead to the military-industrial complex. War requires money. Endless wars require endless money. Historically, the Fed has always been there to print the cash needed to drop bombs on countries most Americans can't find on a map. But lately, with interest rates high, the cost of borrowing that war money has skyrocketed. The debt service on the war machine is becoming unsustainable. Is it possible that the hawks in the administration and the Pentagon view Powell as an obstacle to their global ambitions? Are they trying to remove him to install a yes man who will drop rates to zero, fire up the printers, and finance World War III without blinking? It's a terrifying thought, but we have to ask, is Powell being targeted because he is too hawkish on inflation and not hawkish enough on war? Senator Kennedy's plea for cooperation rather than conflict is the plea of a man who sees the cliff edge approaching. He knows that if the bond vigilantes, the global investors who buy U.S. debt, decide that the U.S. government is dysfunctional and at war with its own central bank, they will stop buying our debt. If they stop buying, yields go vertical. Mortgage rates hit 10%, 12%, 15%. The housing market implodes. The stock market, which is propped up by cheap leverage, evaporates. Pensions vanish. This is the fragile state Kennedy is terrified of. He isn't just worried about a recession, he is worried about a sovereign debt crisis that ends the American empire. And the DOJ is out there playing with matches in a dynamite factory. There is another layer here, the scapegoat strategy. We are heading into an election cycle where the economy is the number one issue. The administration knows that people are angry. They know you can't afford groceries. They know gas is up. They need someone to blame. They can't blame themselves, narcissists never do. They can't blame their policies, that would admit failure. So, they are setting up Jerome Powell as the fall guy. By launching these investigations, they are planting the seed in the public mind, it's not the president's fault your life is hard, it's that corrupt guy at the Federation. It creates a narrative buffer. If the economy crashes before November, they can point to the criminal investigation and say, "See, we tried to stop him." It is cynical, it is Machiavellian, and it is exactly how these people operate. But let's go deeper into the perjury accusation. Kennedy says there is no evidence. But what if the crime Powell committed wasn't a crime against the law, but a crime against the agenda? In the world of the elite, the only real sin is disobedience. Perhaps Powell refused to monetize a specific tranche of debt. Perhaps he refused to bail out a specific donor-class hedge fund. Perhaps he pushed back against the ESG, environmental, social, and governance mandates being forced onto the banking sector. If he stepped out of line, the DOJ is the enforcement arm sent to break his knees. This isn't justice, it's a mob hit with a government seal. And why is Kennedy the only one making noise? Where are the other fiscal conservatives? Where are the Democrats who claim to care about institutional norms? Their silence is complicity. It suggests that the order has gone out from the top, Powell is done. Let him burn. Kennedy might be the only one off the leash, or maybe he is playing his role in the drama to make it look like there is still a debate. We have to be skeptical of everyone, even the ones telling us what we want to hear. Is Kennedy's defense genuine, or is he just trying to prevent a market panic that would hurt his own donors? We hope it's the former, but we must prepare for the latter. Let's connect this to the great wealth transfer. During the pandemic, we saw the largest transfer of wealth from the middle class to the billionaire class in human history. Small businesses were crushed, and megacorporations thrived. Now, we are in Phase 2. Phase 2 is about asset seizure. High interest rates crush the little guy who has a variable rate mortgage or credit card debt. They default. The banks, or the private equity firms that own the banks, scoop up the assets for pennies on the dollar. If the DOJ destabilizes the Fed and causes a panic, that process accelerates. The instability Kennedy warns about is actually a shopping spree for the elites. They want the crash because they have the cash to buy the wreckage. We also have to consider the psychological impact on the American psyche. When you see the highest law enforcement agency attacking the highest financial authority, it destroys your trust in the system. It creates a sense of lawlessness. It makes you feel like no one is in charge, or worse, that the people in charge are lunatics. This demoralization is a key tactic in subversion. A demoralized population doesn't fight back. They just want it to stop. They become willing to accept any solution, even a tyrannical one, just to restore order. Is this chaos being engineered to make us beg for the iron fist? Kennedy mentions absolute proof being required for such serious claims. He is appealing to the old standards of American jurisprudence, innocent until proven guilty, burden of proof on the accuser. But those standards are dead. We live in the era of show trials. The process is the punishment. Just having the subpoena hanging over his head weakens Powell. It distracts him. It forces him to spend millions on lawyers. It undermines his authority in every meeting he takes. He is a lame duck walking. And if the Fed chair is a lame duck, then the dollar is a sitting duck. The rising cost of living is the most visceral part of this. Kennedy knows that inflation is a tax that you can't vote against. But it's more than a tax, it's a form of slavery. If you have to work 60 hours a week just to eat and pay rent, you are not free. You are a serf. And if the government destroys the currency through incompetence or malice, they are tightening the chains. The fight over the Fed is a fight over who holds the key to those chains. The DOJ wants that key. They want to be able to dictate economic outcomes based on political goals. You want a loan for a gas car? Sorry, Fed says no. You want a loan for a solar panel? Here is 0% interest. That is the world they are building, a command economy disguised as capitalism. We should also look at the international reaction. What is China thinking right now? They are watching the US government eat itself. They are laughing. They see this as proof that the American system is failing. It emboldens them to move on Taiwan. It emboldens them to dump US treasuries. The destabilization Kennedy speaks of doesn't stop at the border. It invites aggression from our adversaries. A weak America is a dangerous world. By attacking Powell, the administration is projecting weakness on a global stage. They are showing the world that the US House is divided and cannot stand. There is a theory called the Cloward-Piven strategy, which involves overloading the system with so much stress, debt, entitlements, crises, that it collapses, paving the way for a socialist reset. Doesn't this feel like that? Overload the border. Overload the debt. Overload the justice system. And now, overload the central bank. It feels coordinated. It feels like a controlled demolition where the charges are being detonated one by one. Kennedy is the guy pointing at the explosives and yelling, but the countdown is already running. Let's not forget the role of the shadow banks, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. These massive asset managers hold more power than the Fed in many ways. Are they pulling the strings here? Do they want Powell out? Maybe Powell's policies are hurting their ESG scores or their leveraged positions. If the corporate oligarchy wants a change in monetary policy, they don't ask nicely. They use their captured government agencies to force the change. The DOJ might just be the hired muscle for the real power players who operate from the boardrooms of New York and Davos. Protecting citizens, says Kennedy. It sounds nice. But in the eyes of the deep state, citizens are a nuisance. We consume resources. We complain. We vote, sometimes. They would prefer a population of dependents. A population that relies on the government for food, housing, and healthcare is a population that can be controlled. An independent middle class with savings and property is a threat. Inflation destroys the middle class. Instability destroys savings. So, if the goal is control, then everything the DOJ is doing makes perfect sense. They are not trying to protect you from the Fed, they are trying to break the only thing standing between you and total dependency. We are witnessing an institutional cannibalism. The system is so corrupt, so bloated, and so desperate for resources that the organs of the state are attacking each other. The immune system has turned on the body. This is the terminal phase of an empire. When the Praetorian Guard, the DOJ, attacks the Treasury, the Fed, Caesar is in trouble. Kennedy knows his history. He knows how Rome fell. It didn't fall to barbarians initially, it fell to internal rot, debasement of the currency, and political infighting. He sees the parallels, and he is trying to sound the alarm. But here is the ultimate question for the skeptic: what if Kennedy is wrong? What if Powell is actually guilty of something horrific? What if the corruption at the Fed is so bad that even the corrupt DOJ had to step in? That is the beauty of the confusion they create. We don't know who to trust. We don't know if Powell is the victim or the villain. We don't know if the DOJ is the aggressor or the cleaner. This state of confusion is weaponized. It keeps us paralyzed. We argue amongst ourselves while they loot the vault. So, as we stare into this abyss, remember that this is not about a subpoena. This is not about a legal technicality. This is about the future of your money, your freedom, and your country. The war has moved from the battlefield to the bank account. And right now, it looks like the bad guys are winning. Senator Kennedy has drawn a line in the sand, but the tide is coming in fast. Will the levee hold? Or are we about to be washed away by a flood of printed money and authoritarian decrees? Stay tuned, because in the final part of this hour, we are going to talk about what you can do to prepare. We are going to discuss how to insulate yourself from this madness, how to see through the fog of war, and how to survive the crash that they seem so determined to engineer. The system may be breaking, but you don't have to break with it. We have spent the last 45 minutes peeling back the layers of this onion, and what we have found at the center is enough to make you weep for the future of this republic. Senator Kennedy's warning about the conflict between the DOJ and the Federal Reserve is not just a soundbite, it is the canary in the coal mine. It is the final gasp of an old system before it is suffocated by the new order. The fact that the executive branch is willing to risk a total economic collapse just to score a political win, or perhaps to force a systemic reset, should tell you everything you need to know about their priorities. They do not care about your 401k. They do not care about the price of milk. They care about power, absolute and unchecked. Let's talk about the endgame. What happens if the DOJ wins? What happens if they manage to drag Jerome Powell through the mud, stick a perjury charge on him, and force him out? The market reaction will be immediate and violent, but the long-term consequence is what you need to fear. A captured Federal Reserve means the end of sound money. It means the dollar becomes nothing more than a coupon issued by the ruling party, with its value determined by how well you obey. We are looking at the potential weaponization of your bank account. If the central bank loses its independence, there is no firewall between the politician's whim and your wallet. Kennedy used the word fragile. Let that word echo in your mind. A United States senator, privy to classified briefings and backroom deals, described the U.S. economy as fragile. He didn't say strong but challenged. He didn't say resilient. He said fragile. That is code for insolvent. That is code for broke. The only reason the lights are still on is because they keep printing money to pay the electric bill. But you can't print productivity. You can't print trust. And you certainly can't print your way out of a crisis of confidence. When the world realizes that the US government is at war with its own central banker, the confidence evaporates. The emperor has no clothes, and he is fighting with his tailor. This brings us to the looming specter of the central bank digital currency, CBDC. I have mentioned it before, but it bears repeating because it is the linchpin of the globalist agenda. Cash represents freedom. Cash is anonymous. Cash is private. They hate cash. They want a system where every transaction is tracked, traced, and approved. Is Powell a holdout? Is he resisting the rapid implementation of FedNow or a digital dollar? If he is, then he is an obstacle to the surveillance state. Removing him clears the path for a compliant technocrat who will usher in the era of programmable money. Money that expires. Money that can only be spent on approved goods. money that can be turned off if your social credit score drops too low. This legal attack feels like a bulldozer clearing the ground for a digital prison. The media, of course, is playing its part beautifully. They will focus on the legal drama. They will bring on legal experts to dissect the subpoenas. They will talk about accountability. It is all noise. It is all smoke and mirrors designed to keep you from looking at the man behind the curtain. They won't tell you that the banks are sitting on unrealized losses that exceed their equity. They won't tell you that the commercial real estate market is a black hole. They want you focused on the soap opera of DOJ versus Powell so you don't notice that the ship is taking on water. Kennedy is trying to shout iceberg, but the band plays on. So, what do you do? That is the question every awake individual must answer. If the system is rigged, if the money is broken, and if the government is hostile to stability, you cannot rely on them to save you. You must become your own central bank. This means getting out of the system. It means holding assets that have no counterparty risk. Gold, silver, land. Things that are real. Things that cannot be subpoenaed into non-existence. Things that cannot be inflated away by a bureaucrat with a keyboard. Kennedy's warning is a signal to exit the burning theater while the exits are still open. We also need to consider the possibility of a cyber polygon-style event. If the DOJ attack fails to remove Powell, or if the markets don't crash fast enough for their liking, what is the next card they play? A cyber attack on the financial infrastructure? A sudden glitch that wipes out debt but also wipes out savings? It sounds like science fiction, but look around you. We are living in a world where pipelines are hacked, food processing plants burn down, and trains derail with alarming frequency. Chaos is the ladder they climb. A financial blackout would provide the perfect excuse to nationalize the banks and introduce the digital solution they have had waiting in the wings. Senator Kennedy's appeal to cooperation is noble, but it is naive. You cannot cooperate with a predator. You cannot negotiate with a cancer. The elements within the deep state that are pushing this agenda are not interested in the well-being of the nation, they are interested in the consolidation of global power. They view the United States not as a homeland, but as an economic zone to be looted. Powell is just a manager of that zone who has become inconvenient. Kennedy is a legacy politician trying to uphold rules that no longer exist. The game has changed. The board has been flipped. Protecting citizens from a rising cost of living. Let's translate that one last time. He means protecting you from starvation. He means protecting you from homelessness. He means protecting you from the kind of poverty that leads to riots in the streets. He sees the social unrest coming. He knows that hungry people are dangerous people. The DOJ, in their arrogance, thinks they can control the outcome. They think they can break the Fed and still keep the populace in line. They are playing with fire in a room full of gasoline. The timing of this is also crucial relative to the election. They need the economy to appear functional until the votes are counted, or fortified. But the math isn't working. The debt is too high. The interest payments are swallowing the budget. They might have decided that a controlled crash now is better than an uncontrolled crash later. Or perhaps they want to crash it now to blame the current circumstances on institutional corruption at the Fed, thereby washing their hands of the mess they created. It wasn't our spending, they will say. It was the Fed's mismanagement. It is the perfect alibi. You have to ask yourself, why is the DOJ so confident? They are issuing subpoenas to the most powerful financial institution on earth. That requires a level of backing that goes beyond just the Attorney General. Who is giving the orders? Is it the donors? The World Economic Forum? The intelligence agencies? The merging of the state, the corporate sector, and the intelligence apparatus is complete. We are living in a corporatist oligarchy where the law is applied selectively to punish enemies and protect friends. Powell, it seems, has lost his friend status. As we wrap up this hour, I want you to look at your own situation. Are you dependent on the system? Do you have debt? Are your savings entirely in fiat currency? If the answer is yes, you are vulnerable. Senator Kennedy has given you a gift. He has given you a warning. He has flashed the red light. Do not ignore it. Do not assume that it can't happen here. It is happening here. The institutions are crumbling. The rule of law is a joke. The economy is a Ponzi scheme running on fumes. The fight between the DOJ and the Fed is not a legal battle, it is a battle for the soul of America. It is a battle between the remnants of the old republic and the encroaching tyranny of the administrative state. If the Fed falls, the last domino tips. We enter a new dark age of financial feudalism. Kennedy knows it. The markets know it. And now, you know it. So, turn off the mainstream news. Stop listening to the lies. Look at the data. Follow the money. Trust your gut. The storm isn't just on the horizon, it is pounding at the door. They are tearing down the house to build a prison. Don't be inside when the roof collapses. This has been a deep dive into the hidden war in Washington. We will keep watching. We will keep digging. And we will keep telling you the truth that they don't want you to hear. Because in a world of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. Stay safe, stay skeptical, and keep your powder dry.